All right, so this is our ninth lesson in our fractions unit. It's called Using Decimals and Fractions, based off of Math Focus 5, pages 240 to 242. So what we're going to do today is look at fractions and how they can be turned into decimals. And we will also look at a thing called thousandths grids, which I believe we looked at when we were doing decimals back in the fall. So this will be kind of a return to some stuff you learned earlier in the year. So let's start off. So it says Kara found information on the internet about what the world would be like if there were only 1,000 people instead of over 6 billion people. She learned that in a global village of 1,000 people, only about 250 people would have a TV in their home. So this is a hypothetical thing, saying if there was 1,000 people in the world, only 250 of those people would have a TV. So the question is, well, what fractions describe and decimals describe this portion? Well, we have our numbers 250 out of 1,000. So 250 over 1,000 would be our first fraction. Or we could write it as 250 thousandths. Now, as a decimal, you'd have your 0 in your ones column, your 2 in your tenths column, your 5 in your hundredths column, and your 0 in your thousandths column. So your decimal would be 0.250, and that's 250 thousandths. However, notice the 0 here. And remember what I said in the past, that you can add as many zeros on and it won't change the value of the decimal. It just changes the number of decimal places. So this can also be 25 over 100, or 0.25, 25 hundredths. Now we also know that 25 out of 100, thinking like, say we have 100 cents, well, we know that 25 cents is a quarter, and a quarter is a common term for 1/4. So 25 over 100 is equivalent to 1 over 4. So the decimals and fractions we can describe here to review are, for fractions, 250 over 1,000, 25 over 100, and 1 over 4. Those are some fractions we can use to express it. As a decimal, we can express this as 0.250 or 0.25. We can't express this as 0.2 because we're dropping the 5 and that changes the value of it completely. It's not just 2 tenths, it's 25 hundredths or 250 thousandths. All right, now I'm going to show you something else, which is what the thousandths grid is. We're going to express 0.250 on a thousandths grid using decimalsquares.com. In the classroom, normally I would just give you thousandths grids, but some of you don't have printers, and because we're doing this online, I've tried to find an interactive tool to show thousandths grids. Unfortunately, there's not many great ones online, and this is the best one I can find, so bear with me because it's not exactly wonderful, but it's the best I can do. So what we have here is decimalsquares.com, and I will share the link on Teams and in my notes. So this is a thousandths grid. I can change this one to a thousandths grid if I want to too, since we're talking about thousands. Okay, but I could also make it a hundredths grid. We've worked with hundredths grids and thousandths grids in the past. Now right now it's showing, this thousandths grid here is showing 0.015, 15 thousandths. And the little ones, remember, represent thousands, right? So this whole square represents a hundredth. The little ones represent thousandths, and the whole row here would represent tenths. So our decimal is 0.250. So how do I want to express that? Well, there's 0.1, 0.2, but I want to go 0.250. So I want to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So on this grid, ignore this one over here, but on this grid right here, it shows 0.250 in visual form using a thousandths grid. I could do the same here. This device has its limitations, unfortunately, although it's not the best. But there you go. So there's 0.250. Okay? And I can just delete it by going back like that. Okay. Let's move on to checking. So on checking number 1, it asks the following. It says, Write fractions and decimals that represent the portion of people in the global village who would not have a TV in their home. Use Kara's grid to help you. So we need to use some of the information that was based on the previous lessons question, the 25 out of 100. We know that 100 take away 25 is 75. So if 1/4 of this global population has a TV, that means that 3 other quarters do not. So what are the fractions and decimals that can represent the people who do not have a TV in their home? Well, we can start with 75 over 100, 0.75. We could also go 75 over 1,000, which is, 750 over 1,000, which is 0.750. But we also know that 75 cents is 3/4. So 75 out of 100 is 3/4. So we can say that 75 out of 100 is equal to 3 over 4. So the decimals and fractions that we can make out of this are the following: 75 out of 100, 750 out of 1,000, 3 over 4. Those are our fractions. And for our decimals, we got 0.75 and 0.750. Let's move on to number 2. Now, number 2 says that 200 people in a global village of 1,000 earn less than $1 a day. That's pretty sad, but there is a reality to that in the world. So the first thing it wants me to do is color a thousandths grid to show this. So that's what I will do. So I'm going to go back to the decimal website, decimalsquares.com, and I'm going to show 200 out of 1,000. So I'm just doing it on both so it doesn't confuse anyone. So this is how I show it on a thousandths grid. Here's there's 200 of those little squares colored out of 1,000 total. Now, it asks us, how is this related? For part B, it asks us, how does this diagram show that this is 1/5 of people? Well, I can't really show you on the diagram so much, but I can show you here. 200 out of 1,000, if we divide both numbers by 200, well, 200 divided by 200 equals 1. 1,000 divided by 200 equals 5. So these are equivalent fractions. So 200 over 1,000 is equal to 1 over 5. Part C asks, write 4 equivalent decimals and fractions to represent the colored area on my grid. Well, I already know that the grid shows 200 out of 1,000, so there's one of my fractions. But if I drop both the zeros here, I could get 20 out of 100, which is equivalent. I could drop another 2 zeros to get 2 over 10. And then I already have my 1 over 5 that I used from the previous question. So this is 200 thousandths, 20 hundredths, 2 tenths, and 1/5. Now to express these as decimals, same deal. This would go to the thousands. So we have 200 thousandths, 20 hundredths, and 2 tenths. And these are all equivalent decimals. The only difference is this one has 2 zeros, this one has 1 zero, this one has none. Remember what I said. Zeros added on to the end of a decimal, as long as it doesn't change the value, it won't matter. I could put a dozen zeros on the end of 0.2. It's still 2 tenths. All right? So I hope this is clear, and if you have any questions, by all means, you can contact me on Microsoft Teams or email me. Thank you. Farewell now.